Sometimes, the quietest people are the ones you should watch out for. This is a story about two brothers who were about to teach their entire school a lesson it would never, ever forget. Elijah and Emanuel Reed were identical twins, not just brothers by blood, but bonded by a discipline they learned in the quiet of a dojo. They had just moved to Northwood, an upscale suburb with perfect lawns and old traditions, and enrolled in the prestigious Northwood Academy. It felt like a different universe compared to the lively, diverse community that had raised them. On their first day, their father, David, a man whose strength you could see in the lines on his face, gave them some heavy advice. "In a place like this," he said, his voice low and firm, "you'll have to be twice as good just to be seen as equal. You carry our name and our honor. Be respectful, be diligent, but most of all, be smart. Don't let someone else's ignorance become your problem." The twins took his words seriously. They walked the halls of Northwood with their heads high, calm and observant. They weren't looking for a fight. But at Northwood Academy, a fight was looking for them. It didn't take long for the school's unofficial welcoming committee to find them. Chad Callahan, a senior with a cruel smirk and the confidence that comes with family money, didn't see new students, he saw intruders. With his two lackeys, Kyle and Brandon, in tow, he made his move on their very first day. As the twins were trying to find the main office, Chad stepped right in their path. He looked them up and down, a sneer on his face. Well, what do we have here?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like Northwood finally hit its diversity quota. So, which scholarship did you guys get?" "We feel guilty, grant." Kyle and Brandon laughed. A few other students looked uncomfortable but quickly turned away, their silence making them part of the problem. Elijah's jaw tightened. He felt his hands ball into fists. But then, a light touch on his arm. It was Emanuel, his face impossible to read. "Dad's words, Eli," Emanuel whispered. "Breathe. Control." Elijah took a slow breath and forced his hands to relax. He gave Chad a cool stare, said nothing, and simply stepped around him, Emanuel at his side. They didn't know it then, but this was just the first tremor before an earthquake. The bullies saw two quiet kids who backed down. They had no idea they'd just threatened two disciplined fighters who were just choosing peace. For now. Act 1, the setup. Scene 1, the hallway. The days that followed were a non-stop test of their patience. Chad's hostility wasn't a one-time thing, it was just the opening shot. The hallways of Northwood Academy turned into a daily battleground. One afternoon, the bell screamed, and students poured into the hall. Elijah and Emanuel were walking together, talking about an algebra problem, when Chad came around the corner and slammed his shoulder into Emanuel. The impact was deliberate, sending Emanuel's books flying across the floor. "Whoa, watch where you're going," Chad said, faking surprise with a nasty grin. Kyle and Brandon, right on cue, started laughing. "Yeah, man," Kyle added, "be more careful. You might scuff up the floor with that cheap binder of yours." Emanuel knelt to gather his things, his movements calm, hiding the humiliation boiling inside him. Elijah stood over him like a bodyguard, his eyes locked on Chad. You could feel the tension in the air. Dozens of students walked by. Some slowed down to watch the drama, while others just looked away, pretending not to see. No one helped. No one said a word for them. It was like they were invisible. Elijah's voice was low and dangerously steady. "You did that on purpose." Chad put a hand on his chest, faking innocence. "Me? Never. It was an accident. You guys are just clumsy, I guess." The racist jab hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Elijah took a half step forward, his body tensed up like a loaded spring. He could feel years of karate training screaming at him to act. But he could also hear his father's voice, "Control. Don't let their ignorance become your storm." Emanuel, now with his books in hand, stood up and put a hand on his brother's arm. "It's not worth it, Eli," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked Chad right in the eye, with a look of strength the bully couldn't understand. Then, the twins turned and walked away, leaving Chad and his friends laughing behind them. But the laughter sounded weak. For a split second, Chad had seen something in their eyes, not fear, but a calm intensity that was way more unsettling. He just shook it off, telling himself they were weak. But a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. Scene 2, the cafeteria. The cafeteria was the social center of Northwood, a big, sunny room buzzing with teenage energy. For Elijah and Emanuel, it had become a place where they felt completely alone. They'd get their lunch and sit at an empty table in the corner, an island in a sea of unfriendly faces. The whispers followed them there, and the stares felt like a physical weight. Chad, Kyle, and Brandon made it their mission to turn the twins' lunch into a cruel show. They'd sit at a table in the middle of the room, holding court, their voices loud enough for everyone to hear. Here, their attacks were sneakier, insults disguised as jokes. "Hey, you guys hear about the new academic standards?" Chad would announce, looking right at the twins' corner. "They're lowering the bar so everyone gets a shot. It's called the pity pass." His table would explode with laughter. The twins kept eating, their faces blank, pretending not to hear. But they heard every single word. One day, the topic was careers. "My dad says I'm a shoo-in for his firm," Kyle bragged. "Legacy, you know." "I'm thinking politics," Brandon puffed out his chest. Then Chad, with that trademark smirk, raised his voice. "I don't know, guys. Maybe I'll go into something more charitable. Like running a non-profit that helps kids from, disadvantaged backgrounds get into schools they aren't really qualified for." The insult was so direct, so dripping with racist ideas about affirmative action, that the tables nearby went quiet. Everyone knew who he was talking about. Elijah's fork froze. He set it down with a soft click that sounded loud in the sudden silence. He pushed his chair back, ready to stand up, ready to finally do something. But under the table, Emanuel's hand shot out and gripped his brother's knee. "Don't," he mouthed, his eyes begging. "Don't give them what they want. We eat. We finish our day. We are better than this." Elijah looked at his brother, then around the room at all the faces watching them, waiting for the show. He slowly pulled his chair back in, picked up his fork, and took a bite of food that tasted like ash. They finished their meal in silence as the cafeteria noise slowly returned to normal. But it was just another crack in the dam that was holding back their breaking point. Scene 3, after school. The walk home was their only escape. As they walked down the tree-lined streets, the calm facade they wore at school would start to crumble. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Manny," Elijah said, his voice tight with frustration. "Did you see them in there? They're not even trying to hide it. They want a reaction. And one of these days, I'm gonna give them one." Emanuel was quiet for a moment. "I know," he finally said. "I feel it too. It's like this constant weight. But what would happen if you did? What would it solve? It would make me feel better." Elijah shot back, stopping to face his brother. "It would show them they can't just walk all over us. They think we're weak, Manny. They think because we're quiet, we're scared." "We're not scared, we're disciplined," Emanuel countered. "There's a difference. Remember what Sensei taught us. The first rule of karate is not to start a fight. It's having the skill to finish one, but the wisdom not to start it. We use our strength to defend ourselves, not our egos. This isn't about ego." Elijah's voice rose. "It's about respect. They're humiliating us every single day because we're black. How long are we supposed to just take it?" The raw pain in his brother's voice made Emanuel go quiet. He knew Elijah was right. The bullying was a daily attack on who they were. "I don't have the answer, Eli," he admitted softly. "But I know that losing control is losing the battle. That's what they want. They want us to become the angry black men they already think we are. We can't let them win." Not like that. They stood there in silence. They were trained fighters, black belts who had spent years honing their bodies and minds. But the biggest fight they had ever faced wasn't in a dojo, it was inside themselves, every single day. Scene 4, Home Life and the Mentor. When they got home, the smell of their father's cooking filled the air. David Reed was in the kitchen, and he didn't need to see their faces to know something was wrong. He could feel the heavy silence that followed them into the house. He turned, his expression kind but knowing. "Rough day." "It was school," Elijah muttered, dropping his bag by the door. "Just tired," Emanuel added quickly. But you couldn't fool David Reed. He saw the tension in Elijah's shoulders and the forced calm on Emanuel's face. He had them sit down at the kitchen table. "Listen," he said. "I know this move has been hard. I know Northwood is different. And I know there are people out there with ignorant hearts. People who will look at you, see only your skin color, and try to make you feel small. To find your balance when the world tries to knock you over. That black belt you earned. It isn't just a piece of cloth. It's a responsibility. It means you have the power to cause harm, so you have an even greater responsibility to show restraint. True strength," David continued, his voice softening, "isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can take and still stand tall. It's about control. It's about not letting someone else's hate decide your actions. Anyone can throw a punch when they're angry. It takes a true warrior to stay calm and act with purpose, not passion." He looked from one son to the other. "So whatever is happening at that school, you don't let it break you. And you don't let it turn you into something you're not. You are my sons. You are Reed men. And you are stronger than any insult they can throw at you. Understand?" "Yes, Dad," they answered together. The talk gave them a fresh sense of purpose, a reminder of what they stood for. But it also highlighted the immense pressure they were under, caught between their father's ideals and the ugly reality of racist bullying. Act 2, Rising Action. Scene 5, The Secret Reveal. That night, the twins went down to the basement. This was their sanctuary. Their father had turned the space into a dojo, with mats on the floor and a heavy bag in the corner. This was where the quiet students from Northwood Academy vanished, and Elijah and Emanuel, the martial artists, appeared. They changed into their white GIs and tied their belts around their waists. Not the colored belts of beginners, but the deep, worn black of experts. The frayed edges told a story of more than a decade of dedication. They moved through their katas in perfect, silent unison, a display of controlled power. Every block was sharp, every strike precise. This was their secret. The truth the bullies could never imagine. They weren't just two new kids, they were highly trained fighters. Then, they faced each other to spar. This wasn't about anger, it was a conversation through movement. Elijah, the more aggressive of the two, launched a series of swift attacks. Emanuel, the strategist, moved with fluid grace, deflecting and redirecting his brother's energy, using Elijah's own momentum against him. Elijah was fire, Emanuel was water. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. This is where they channeled all the frustration from their days at school. Every racist taunt and every shove in the hallway was turned into fuel for their discipline. The bullies saw victims, but they were really looking at two coiled springs, just waiting. Scene 6, Escalation in the Classroom. The harassment kept getting worse, more bold with each day the twins refused to fight back. The classroom, which should have been a safe space, became another front in Chad's war. In American history class, the teacher, Mr. Harrison, asked about the effectiveness of nonviolent protest. Elijah raised his hand. "I think," Elijah said, his voice clear, that nonviolent resistance is powerful because it takes the moral high ground. It exposes the cruelty of the oppressor and forces everyone else to pick a side. It's a different kind of strength, one that takes more discipline than throwing a punch. Mr. Harrison beamed. An excellent point, Elijah. From the desk right behind him, Chad leaned forward and whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, of course he'd say that. His people are good at taking a beating. The racist comment hit like a punch. A few students gasped. Elijah's back went stiff. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears. His hand on his desk curled into a white-knuckled fist. But then, he felt a light touch on his arm. It was Emanuel, sitting next to him. Emanuel didn't look at him, just kept his eyes on the front of the room and gave a tiny shake of his head. Not here. Not like this. The desire for revenge warred with years of training. He took a deep, shaky breath and forced his fist to uncurl. He had held on, but it was costing him. Scene 7, The Library Incident. A few days later, Emanuel was in the library, trying to find some peace. He was so deep into his research that he didn't notice Kyle and Brandon until they were standing right over him. Working hard or hardly working? Kyle sneered. Emanuel looked up. Can I help you? I don't know, can you? Brandon replied, leaning on the table. See, we were just talking, and we don't think you belong here. This is a place for smart people. People who got in on their own merit. The librarian shot them a warning look, but she was too far away to hear. Emanuel slowly closed his book. I have as much right to be here as you do. Oh, a tough guy now. Kyle laughed. He reached out and swiped the heavy book off the table. It crashed to the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the library. Oops, Kyle said with a smirk. Slippery. They stood there, blocking his way, trying to provoke him. It was a classic bully move, corner him somewhere there were witnesses, but quiet enough that they could twist the story later. Emanuel felt a surge of adrenaline, but his training kicked in. He sized up the situation, 2 bullies, 1 exit blocked, and a room full of witnesses who wouldn't do a thing. Backing down was the only smart move. He stood up slowly, showing no fear. Without a word, he bent down, picked up his book, walked around the other side of the table, and left the library. He could feel their eyes burning into his back and hear their frustrated insults as he walked away. He had escaped, but he was shaken. It wasn't just words anymore, it was getting physical. A line had been crossed. Scene 8, The Failed Attempt to Report. That night, the twins decided they couldn't do it alone anymore. The library incident was a clear escalation. They went to the principal's office the next morning. Principal Thompson listened with a look of practiced patience as the twins explained everything, the taunts, the shoves, the library, the constant racism from Chad and his friends. When they finished, he sighed. Boys, he began, his tone patronizing, Northwood is a competitive school. Are you sure you're not misinterpreting some good-natured ribbing? Elijah couldn't believe it. Good-natured? They physically assaulted me and cornered my brother in the library. Do you have any proof? The principal asked. Any witnesses who will back you up? It was a trap, and they knew it. The witnesses were the same students who always looked away. People see it, Emanuel said quietly. They're just afraid. Well, without proof, my hands are tied, the principal said, his voice final. It's just a he said situation. My advice? Try a little harder to fit in. Don't be so sensitive. Boys will be boys. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm very busy. They were dismissed. They walked out of the office, stunned. They had tried to do the right thing, to trust the people in charge. And the system had completely failed them. The message was loud and clear, you're on your own. Scene 9, Another talk with Dad. That night, their father found them in the basement dojo, not training, but just sitting on the mats. This time, they told him everything, including the soul-crushing meeting with Principal Thompson. As he listened, David's face hardened. A cold, quiet anger settled in his eyes. He was furious that his children had been hurt and that the system had betrayed them. When they finished, he was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice dangerously calm. You did the right thing. You tried to solve this with honor. You showed restraint. You asked for help. He stood up and began to pace. I taught you that your karate was for defense. A last resort. I taught you to respect authority. He stopped and turned to face them, his eyes blazing. But the system has failed you. The authority has failed you. When an opponent is relentless, when they refuse to listen, and when they physically attack you, the rules of engagement change. He knelt in front of them, putting a hand on each of their shoulders. I am not telling you to seek revenge. I am not telling you to become them. But I am giving you my permission. If, and only if, they lay their hands on you again, you have my permission to defend yourselves. You have my permission to end the fight. He looked each of them in the eye. But you will do it with honor. You will do it with control. You will not fight with rage. You will use your skill. You will show them the difference between a brawling coward and a true martial artist. Don't start a fight. But if one comes to you, you finish it. Understood? Understood, they both replied. The burden of holding back had been lifted, replaced by a new, heavy responsibility. The next time Chad and his friends came for them, they wouldn't be turning away. Act 3, Climax and Resolution. Scene 10, The Breaking Point. The Northwood Academy Annual Fair was the big social event of the season. The school lawns were packed with food stalls, games, and music. For a moment it was cheerful enough that Elijah and Emanuel almost let themselves relax. But Chad, Kyle, and Brandon were there, too. Emboldened by the principal's inaction, they saw the public setting as the perfect stage for one final act of humiliation. They spotted the twins near the food stalls where a large crowd had gathered. This was their chance. They cornered them near a large oak tree, cutting off any escape. The happy noise of the fair seemed to fade as the tension rose. Other students nearby noticed and stopped to watch, sensing that the long-simmering conflict was about to erupt.